evening, and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the law, the Constitution, and the events of today into your living room. Mark, what are we covering tonight?
I think we're going to start out with Cyprus.
Cyprus. We're talking about the island nation that has been known as a central foothold in the banking industry where a lot of money is parked. Is that the Cyprus we're talking about?
That's the Cyprus we're talking about, and there was a huge bank failure there, and there's really been some precedent-setting events that have taken place.
Well, wait a minute. When talking about precedent-setting, are we still talking about the euro taking the problem in the European Union and Cyprus having a debt that wasn't repaid? Is that where this is going?
Well, yeah, there's pressure from the EU to give them, I guess it was 10 billion euros.
That's a bailout.
Yeah, it's a bailout.
It's a bailout. Why is Cyprus failing?
Well, a lot of the banks there put money into Greece.
Oh, was Cyprus one of the countries that backed the resurgence in Greece and the loans to Greece, and so they were expecting to be paid back?
Right. They bet on a rebound there, and it didn't happen.
Well, we know that why Greece did not happen is because they never really took care of their social problem of funding people from cradle to grave. But why is Cyprus falling into the same? Did they over bet that Greece was going to come back?
Yes, they did.
Okay, well, how much money are we talking about here, Mark?
Well, it's hard to put your finger on it. You know, some people say 4.3 billion. There's billions here and billions there, but it's a fair amount. But what's interesting about this whole situation is how they're going to handle the loss.
Well, how are they going to handle the loss?
Well, what they're going to do is they're going to do kind of a sliding scale, and the depositors who aren't insured are going to have to take a haircut.
Wait a minute. When we're talking about taking a haircut, we're talking about something a little more literally than that. We're talking about a financial haircut. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so how are the people that have bank accounts going to take a financial haircut?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, some numbers have been bounced around and said, well, if you have over 100,000 euros, which I guess is like $130,000 in your bank account, you can get hit for a certain amount. But now it turns out, I guess, even people below that are going to be hit for a certain amount. Maybe that's 10%. You're down to that level.
Okay, yeah. This has been a hot topic in the news lately because I understand that the consideration by the European Union was that they were putting so much pressure on the government of Cyprus that the government of Cyprus was actually going to lock the banks down and then forcibly take money from bank accounts to make up for this I think it was how much was it? A $10 billion repayment debt for the European Union?
Well, that's what they want for the bailout. I think that they bet about $4.3 billion on the Greek debt.
Okay, they bet on that. Okay, so what's going to happen? What about the deposit accounts?
Okay, so the depositors, you know, if you're over 100,000 euros, if you're rich, you may be hit for 40 to 60% of your deposit.
But wait a minute. That's never really been done before in the modernization of the banking rules. So why is it that Cyprus is reaching to something that's completely outside of what is normal banking procedure?
Well, they have some, I guess you would either call them reasons or you might call them excuses, and they go like this. They say, well, first of all, Cyprus has a lot of money laundering going on because the Russians use that to launder money.
Wait, are you talking about the Russian oligarchs?
That's not really stated one way or another, but it says they're using that. Now, there was a treaty with Russia, and they did work out a treaty with them, so they do a fair amount of business with Russia. Because basically, the Russians trust the Cyprus bank because it's basically a British banking system, so it's reliable civil courts and that kind of thing.
Okay. So they can enforce their deposits if something goes wrong.
And so, well, contracts in general. Yes. Also, I think there's quite a few Russians living in Cyprus.
Okay.
So, but what happens here is that it's that the money in Cyprus is being put back into Russia.
Well,
so it's not like coming out of Russia and going to Cyprus. It's like being put back into Russia.
Yeah, from Cyprus.
Right, from Cyprus.
Okay, so then
it's going to be laundered the other way.
Yeah, but I got a question. Doesn't Cyprus have a lot of natural gas off the coastline that the Russian gas companies are using and they're taking through transactions and contracts with the Cyprus government?
Well, there is gas. There is gas, but I'm not sure what the value is and who has the holdings.
Well, what I understood was the Russian oil companies were going to do a deal with Cyprus to help refund their debt load to the European Union.
Well, that might have been a ruse.
It might have been a ruse for what?
That might have been a ruse. But anyway, going back to the precedent-setting issue is that if you're going to do a sliding scale, in other words, your poor depositors you're going to hit for 10%, and your richer depositors you're going to hit for 60%. That's never really been done. A progressive
Well, it's like an instant taxation.
Well, it's not tax.
There's definitely no representation.
Yeah, there's some confiscation going on. So, but this has never been done before. So this really has a big effect on banking and private enterprise and the whole idea of how safe your money is in a bank.
Right.
And whether you should put your money in a bank.
I understood that it closed all the banks down for over 2 weeks, and they were restricting withdrawals for even the common folk in Cyprus. And I understood.
Well, they had capital controls. You couldn't take out more than $5,000 a month. You could only take out $300 a day from your ATM. If you're leaving the country, you can only take out 3,000 euros. Oh, that's all in euros. That's not in dollars, which is like another 20 or 30% or something like that. So yeah, they did lock everything down. But what's interesting, well, why don't you tell about that? What's interesting, there was some money got out before the lockdown. Well, and when people were asked about who did this, who got the money out, the response was, well, it was kind of the politicians and the bankers.
I think you're referring to the situation where ahead of the vote on whether or not you're going to take money from each of the accounts, about $8.1 billion electronically vanished overnight. And it's interesting because that money was talked about in the Cypriot news that it was going to be, all the money was going to be effectively taxed and to pay off the debt. But what happened was, seriously, there was a direct electronic line leaving the country, and a substantial amount of the money in deposits did vanish.
So it got misplaced. Yeah.
And misplaced. And the funny part about that was it just so happens that those were related to some of the richest people in Cyprus and some of the largest bank accounts put in by the Russian oligarchs and the like, effectively. So this money just vanished. So, and no one's really talking about that in the news, which I found interesting. I found in one article that was actually from a newspaper overseas that brought that up, that money vanished. Over here, that should have been out in the news about the fact that how did $8.1 billion disappear overnight when all the other people had the banks closed down? They couldn't get money really from their ATMs. There was riots in the street over this. So where this is all going? I just don't understand.
Well, going a little further on the kind of
could this happen here?
Sure. It's more likely to start with Greece and then Italy, Portugal, and Spain. But what you have here is that they're saying, look, we're giving a special treatment to this situation because there's money laundering. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you have money going from Cyprus to Russia, is that really money laundering? It's all been taken care of. I mean, they have a treaty; it's taxed. Yes. Okay, so then they say, well, it's because you have a larger more money in your banking business than you have in your GDP. You know, like 7 or 8 times. But if you look at that, then you have the same problem in a lot of other countries: Britain, Germany, France, Austria, Spain, Luxembourg, the Netherlands. They all have more money in their banks than their whole gross national product.
This sounds like a really bad precedent.
So really every excuse or rationalize they have to treat the situation differently doesn't really hold water. You know, really what they're doing here is they're kind of changing the order of how things work. And it's bound to have a cascade effect. Because if they can do it here, then the next place, like I said, is going to be Greece, Italy, Spain.
Yeah, but wait a minute. This is going to completely erode the trust in any banking system. If your money, when you deposit in the bank, and if you don't think you can get that money back, you're not going to deposit in the bank. There's going to be a lot of people with little strong chests underneath their beds. A lot of people with their own private safes. But how could this ever spread here? I brought that up a second ago. Could it spread here?
Well, sure.
And what are we going to do about to protect that? Are our banks under a stronger protection that the government can't just come in and say, oh, by the way, we have to pay for the Affordable Care Act, so now everyone's going to have to pay 10%?
Well, here you've got a situation where like I said, there's no real thing that differentiates Cyprus from a lot of other countries that do a lot of banking. So there's no real reason that they couldn't do it anywhere else.
Okay, I think what we ought to do is, Mark, we have to pay attention to where this is going. But what's our next subject for the night?
Well, we're going to talk about the presidential hopeful and the current mayor of New York.
You wouldn't be talking about Bloomberg, would you?
Michael Bloomberg.
And why do we have him on the radar tonight, Mark?
Well, I think he's kind of thrown himself in the fray over gun control, or actually gun banning.
Gun banning?
Yeah, because he's not for gun control. He doesn't think people should have guns at all.
Well, I thought he was under the impression that he could rewrite the Constitution, and I understand that he wants to ban all guns in New York. And he is actually spending his own money from his billions to ensure that the rest of us can't live under the Constitution, but the Bloomberg Constitution.
Well,
Is that where this is going?
He's putting $12 million in TV ads into anti-gun ads that are aimed at swing states that are kind of could go either way on gun control.
Are you talking more about the southern states?
Yeah, well, there's just several swing states like Georgia. I can't remember what they are, but there's like 6 or 7. So he's targeting there, and he's kind of using this ad campaign of that these guys are country folks.
Bunch of good old boys.
That they are all for background checks. And they go
checks.
for all this. Right?
Yeah, but let's talk about background checks for a minute. Background checks is an immediate lead-in to gun registry, which means that the federal government would have a complete list of everyone that owned a handgun or a rifle or an assault weapon or a shotgun or even a BB gun. It could get to that level. So what the problem with this is the background checks are not what's really people are arguing about. They're talking about that, but they're seeing this as a national gun registry in the guise of background checks. Because if they know that if Mark's buying a Glock tomorrow, they've got it on paper. Oh, Mark's buying a Glock.
Wait a minute. Wait, if you have to register a car, why shouldn't you have to register a gun?
That's an interesting question, Mark. But I have a question. Do you think that the government's going to come in and take your Honda? Is the car they're going to come in and take my car? I mean, that's not what the issue is. Guns are what the big fear is today. And
wait a minute. Guns kill people and cars kill people.
Yes, but who's driving the car and who's handling the gun is the question that no one seems to be able to answer. If a person that's mentally unstable is handling a firearm and he decides to go forward and shoot somebody, yeah, I'm telling you, the Connecticut shootings, the Colorado shootings, all of these things going back to Columbine are horrendous. And my heart goes out to the parents, the families of all of those people. But this country was set up with rules, and those rules are called the Constitution. And you know we speak about this Constitution on every one of our shows. But what I think people are forgetting, that this is not Venezuela. This is not Hugo Chavez wanting to rewrite the Constitution because he doesn't like it.
Hugo's dead.
That's unfortunate.
Yep.
And thank God, because who knows where that's going. But why is Bloomberg so angst about gun control?
Well, I think you're wrong on your answer.
Oh,
yeah, okay,
he's not.
The difference between registering a gun and registering a car, okay, under the Constitution, the idea is that if the citizens have arms, right, and the government becomes tyrannical, they can rise up against the government.
Correct.
So if you have a tyrannical government, the first thing they always do is go collect all the guns.
Well, that goes back to Italy under fascism and Germany under Nazism.
Right.
And that also goes along to like countries like North Korea, where people can't have guns unless they're in the military. Japan, nobody's supposed to own a gun.
So the idea of the registration, why that affects people who are constitutionalists or strict constitutionalists, is because they believe if your gun is registered, it's kind of useless, right? Because if they can go collect all the guns before they do a coup d'etat, you know, if they do a takeover,
right,
then it's kind of useless. So that's why people from a constitutional angle don't want to do the registration. They don't want to do the background checks because they think that's going to give them a list. So they can go collect all the guns if there's a time for takeover.
Yeah, okay, well, I know this is a little premature to talk about it in those terms, but the problem is if the government knows who owns the guns, the government's next step, if they want to impose tyranny, and that's what the Second Amendment was set to stop. It stopped a tyrannical government from imposing effectively like British-like rule as they were in the colonies prior to the Revolution.
Right.
That's what the idea was, to stop that from happening. And the founders of our country actually believed that this could happen again. Now, they didn't name any president. They didn't name any Democratic, Republican Party, but they named a tyrannical government. And here we have a situation where the first steps of knowing who has guns is called a background check, but in reality, it's a gun registry.
Anyway, Samuel Adams, who was quite a ways back, and he said the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States, who are peaceable citizens, from keeping their own arms. So that's the thing. People want to keep their own arms, and they're afraid if they're registered, they won't be able to keep them. Well, so I would think that's the difference between registering a car and registering a weapon.
Okay, I got a question. Does Michael Bloomberg travel with bodyguards?
Well, I'm sure that the bodyguards only would shoot people who were didn't vote for Michael Bloomberg.
Oh, that could be.
Yeah.
But Michael Bloomberg, it's really nice to say that we want no guns on the street. But he's protected by usually probably 10 bodyguards at a time, some with Uzis, some with who knows what, and they're all carrying weapons. He's protected. But what about the rest of us? What if somebody breaks into our home? So why does he believe it's best for the country that nobody has a gun?
But I mean, the conversation is all back to the mass murderers, like these big shootouts. Usually these shootouts occur in gun-free zones because
a school.
Yeah, because the person knows when they come there, they won't have any competition. And the statistics show that, if there's people around with concealed weapons, right, who are breaking up a mass shooting, usually 2 people get killed. If the cops are breaking up a mass shooting, usually 14 people get killed.
That's because it takes them a long time to respond. They don't know who the shooter is, and they don't know how to control the situation. Somebody that's standing there with a concealed weapon, it has the opportunity to maybe stop the problem before it gets any further.
So anyway,
is that what you're referring to, Mark?
So I'm saying, what they've done is they took, the tragic deaths and they use it as a political points, right? And they said, okay, because of these tragic deaths, we shouldn't have any guns and we should take away the Second Amendment. But there's some people who, are parents of kids that were lost, and they said, look, I think we should have
guns in school.
We should have concealed weapons because it's more effective, right?
It is.
So, I mean, yeah, both sides can take a tragedy and try to use it to an extent. Now, the anti-gun people have done this to an incredible amount. They've spent.
I've heard is guns every day.
They've done all their political capital, like capitalizing on these deaths, basically dancing on the graves of these people and exalting it in order to get their political thing. But there are people who lost their children saying, yeah, we should have concealed weapons. So,
like I said, I know both our hearts go out to the families that have lost children in Connecticut. And I'm going to tell you that I have children, and I'd be heartbroken and broken down if somebody came into her school and my youngest. I'd be shocked, and I'd feel violent tendencies. But I don't think the first thing I would do is say tear down the Constitution because of what happened. I'd be looking more at why aren't the people they're the psychos that are running around with the guns, why did they even have a gun in their hand?
Well, I mean, nobody wants people to get mass murdered.
Correct.
That's pure and simple. So I think both sides are using it. It's a very flashpoint. You've got the guy from the NRA. What's his name?
Pierre.
Pierre. You got Pierre, and then you've got people from the other side saying all guns should be banned. What it really comes down to is what's the most effective way of protecting everybody. Some people think it's, have people out there with concealed weapons. Other people think it's like take every weapon away.
Well, that there's states now that are mandating that there has to be an armed person on the school campuses with a gun. And there's other states that are saying that everyone should be in possession or ownership of a gun. And there's even other states that are saying that everyone should be able to have concealed permits.
Right. Well, there's about half the states say that you can bring a concealed weapon onto campus. And the other half say you can't. And there's like 3 or 4 or 5 states where it's kind of up to to local rules. But that's the big issue, really. And as far as where the Constitution plays into, the Constitution would definitely fall down on that people should be able to have concealed weapons.
I understand. As you remember, in the last couple of years, the Supreme Court has fallen in favor of the Constitution. And miraculously, we're hoping that they continue, that those miracle decisions continue on, because there is no way that we should be overreacting to every event that happens in the news and then say we have to change our whole country because of it.
Well, I think there's changes. I think there should be changes as a result of the mass shootings, and those changes there should be more concealed carries.
Okay. Well, listen, I think, Mark, what we have to do is watch where this legislation goes. What's our final subject?
Okay, final subject would be, the Senate. What's going on in the Senate? Well,
the Senate.
So it's interesting going late night in the Senate. They've been passing some different budget cuts and that kind of thing, having to do with the sequester. And so they said, okay, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, about 20% of its budget has to do with controllers, but they're going to take 60% of the cuts. So what they do is they're kind of...
Wait a minute. They're 20% of the budget, and they want to give them 60% of these cuts?
So what they want to do is like take the cuts and put them where they'll pretty much do the most damage.
Well, okay, let me take us back for a minute. The sequester is the automatic cuts that fell into place because there's no way that the budget deal was worked out between the parties.
In a way, that's even a misnomer.
Okay, now here's the.
It's not even a cut because it's like.
And all it is a slowdown and an increase in spend.
Yeah, it's a slowdown and an increase.
It's over a 10-year period, which none of the news people really seem to reporting that $85 billion is cut not tomorrow, but over a 10-year period.
But also, it's a decrease in the increase.
Oh,
so it's
decrease
a smaller
in the increase.
It's a smaller increase. So it's basically a 2.5 off of the 4% increase or 5% increase. So basically, let's say if you had a corporation and you were to say, okay, next year we're going to spend 3% more or 4% more instead of 6% more. Okay, well, first thing we'll do is we're going to lay off all our salesmen.
Right.
And then, your stock will drop, and our stock dropped by 50%. Oh, see what happens when you don't give us our increase, right?
Yeah.
Well, that CEO would be instantly fired.
Well, you realize this is a union tactic. This is a union tactic that's being pushed through on the government level. I know that the sequester was, there was many memos that have been released that the administration wanted the sequester to hurt the most obvious people. So things like closing the White House to tours, which I got to tell you, is pretty low cost. Well, we closed the White House for tours. They stopped the Blue Angels from flying. They wanted to close these small airports, the towers in those airports.
Right.
And then they wanted to cut border agents. And then, of course, as notoriously as they were, they said there's teachers already fired when that we already know. We covered this before. There were no teachers tied to the sequester. That was a joke, of course. And it turns out one after another of all these events that have been pushed down from the top, from the administration, are indications that they're just trying to reach out and hurt the people in the most public manner.
Oh, also, they want to close down Yellowstone.
Oh,
Yosemite.
Yellowstone, Yosemite.
Well, it's kind of like, okay, let's say you're going to drive across the desert, right? And you're the car owner, you're the responsible car owner, and you've got your $20,000 car, and you go, let's see, I've got $60. I think I'll spend it on shining up the tires and getting a wax job on the car.
You mean instead of gas?
Instead of buying gas. And then you run out of gas halfway into the middle of the desert, everyone dies, and you go, well, see what happened, if I had $100 instead of $60. Yeah, but you could have put the money in gas.
In the gas
before you did the wax job. So I mean, it's just ludicrous. It's just a joke. And so I mean, for example, they had a budget amendment that could have avoided the whole FAA shutdown. There was $50 million in
well, I understand the FAA had their own reserve.
They had a slush
they wouldn't
fund.
have had to close one tower.
No, they wouldn't have to close anything. It was a $50 million in slush fund that they wouldn't go, but that Reid blocked that amendment from going to the floor.
I wonder why.
And so, well, this is all going late at night. And he, Reid used the same tactics on dozens of measures in order to extract the most pain, and get the most press out of this. Out
of the sequester.
A 4% increase instead of a 6% increase, right?
Well, if you watch the press, and I kind of look down on this, you watch what's being told to us, and you just got to understand the amount of money the sequester was to begin with, $85 billion. Is like maybe that was 7 weeks of the Iraqi war. So we're not talking about money that compared to $16 trillion in debt, compared to the national budget, even the latest budget that just was released yesterday. They're talking about $1.2 trillion. I mean, $85 billion, this is more of a show. And this seems to be more of a look what the evil people have done to us.
Well, it's going to be they want to lay off the TSA.
Oh, lay off the TSA.
A third of the TSA, so they slow down the airports, which I think they probably should lay off the TSA.
I think they should lay off the TSA. I think the TSA should not be a publicly funded organization.
Also, I think they've outlived their usefulness because, the original reason for the TSA was like people were hijacking planes, using those missiles to attack political and military.
9/11, of course.
Okay. Well, once you put good doors on the cockpit and you gave the pilots pistols, that took care of the whole thing. Now, there's no reason if someone's going to blow up a plane, they could blow up people standing in line. If the plane can't be used for a missile, as a weapon, it's all insurance.
Right.
And you were saying, well, there's people in a plane, you can blow them up. You can blow them up waiting in line in the airport. So the TSA, it doesn't really do anything anymore. It's they don't really need a TSA.
Well, I understand that Janet Napolitano had indicated that the TSA was going to lose so many members of its staff.
Well, that would be fine.
All the airports would be slowed down. And
I think you could have people sign a waiver. You don't have to wait in line. Forget about the TSA. You just get on the plane. Take your chances. I think a lot of people just sign a waiver. Fine.
Well, do you realize, Mark, if you look back when you were young and you first started flying, and I know when I was young when I first started flying, the only thing people were worried about, hijack to Cuba, and so they had very little, if any, very little security. And I remember being able to walk on a plane. You don't have to take off your clothes, go through the nude scanner, hold your head up, dance out like this, put your hands up like that, trying to get through the scanning
But I'm saying the
systems.
whole point of
I just find it. I find that appalling.
no,
more
but the
appalling
whole
than
point
almost anything else.
the whole point on is now that the pilots have pistols,
Yeah.
and now that they've got a good cockpit security, you know, it doesn't make any difference. You don't need anyone checked.
Well, I understand that. Funny enough, Janet Napolitano, after making all the speech about the slowing down of the airports,
As long as people will sign away.
yeah. Well,
Get
what's
people to sign
interesting
away.
is that it turned out statistically the lines were actually flowing faster now because this alleged layoff of TSA. A lot of people were saying, well, maybe I shouldn't fly. Well, there's no change in the TSA manpower, so instead the people in lines were actually going faster in both Los Angeles and New York. There was some studies on this right after she said that to see if this was really going to happen.
Right.
And what's interesting about it is, of course, it didn't happen.
And there's another thing is like, if you're going to get inspected to go on a plane, why does it have to be a federal agency?
It doesn't.
Why can't it just be the airport can have their own security?
Well, you realize San Francisco has a private security
yeah, I mean,
system.
there's no reason for the TSA to be involved in any of this. I don't think.
But you know that the private security system in San Francisco is
So I think
rated-
if the sequester means they have to eliminate the TSA, that's good.
Well, I'm up for that.
Yeah, I think it's just eliminate.
But what
save money.
about the idea that all the federal agencies were preaching gloom and doom over this whole sequester, when in fact the gloom and doom for the sequester amount is only being targeted at really public factors?
If you want to run out of gas in the middle of the desert because you didn't buy gas because you waxed your car before you went across the desert, I think you deserve to run out of gas in the middle of the desert.
I
That's
still
the-
don't
that's the way it
understand.
goes.
Let's go back to this for a
That's the way it
minute.
goes.
Why was it that the cuts that are being pushed through, or allegedly being pushed through, are the ones that are most public? Do you have any opinion?
Well, there's a whole theory, it's like close down the Washington Monument. If you do a government cut, they want to close down the Washington Monument. They want to close down the most visible, make the most terrible thing. They're not going to make a cut in any other substantive, thing, So, but it's an operation, the opposite of a corporation. If a corporation did something, their stock would drop, right?
Of course.
The CEO would be fired. But if the government makes a big splash and goes, oh, we made a big splash, we had to shut down all these important public things because we increased 4% instead of 6%, then they get more money.
Well,
So they get rewarded.
Rewarded
for failure.
Rewarded for
They
failure.
get rewarded for failure.
Well, just as an afternote on this discussion about the TSA and the airports, well, as it turns out, miraculously, there was enough money to keep all the towers operating in all the small airports that they said they were going to close.
Right.
They're not closing them. And miraculously, they're not laying off Border Patrol agents, a third of the agents, so that millions more people will cross the border. They're not doing that. And miraculously enough, the TSA agents they were going to lay off, they never laid off.
Well, I think it would be. I think if Senator Reid wants to shut down Yellowstone, and he wants to shut down Yosemite, and he wants to shut down the Washington Monument and the White House, shut it down.
Okay. Well, listen, on that happy note, thanks, Mark. It's a wonderful evening on Law Talk.